recording with Mr. James Koutoulas on Thursday, August 15th, 2024 at 12:11 p.m. Eastern time. I don't want to jinx it, but it is storming super hard here right now. I have no idea if like the power's gonna go out. So if that happens, that happens. Mr. Koutoulas has been on here a million times before. I think most famously talking about Let's Go Brandon Coin and your fight against NASCAR, and you are also a bit of a folk hero for taking on a massive fucking corruption fraud back in what, 2010, 2011, or was it 2008?
20 Halloween 2011.
Yeah, what was it, John Corzine and whoever else, and but I want to talk to you about because you came on, well, I don't know, like a week ago or 2 weeks ago or whatever. And since that time, there's been, I looked up yesterday when I made the thumbnail, it said $6 trillion in value wiped off the stock for simpletons like myself. And guys, if you go in the description, you can find his Instagram and his Twitter. For simpletons like myself, is that like a headline grabbing kind of statistic that's it's like when Trump dropped the mother of all bombs, right? When he got in office and everyone's like, "Oh my God." But it was a conventional bomb. It was the biggest non-nuclear bomb, which means it was nothing. But because it was the biggest, it made a bunch of news. But anyone that had any cursory understanding of ordnance or military history was like, "Yeah, it's nothing. It's a big firecracker." Is that what this is, or is this much more severe in all of your wisdom?
Yeah, I mean, look, this was definitely a bad move. I mean, we've retraced most of it already. But basically, the sell-off was, I mean, it was one of the largest since 1987. It was triggered by kind of the partial unwinding of what's called the Japanese yen carry trade, which basically Japan has run 0% interest rates or thereabouts for about 35 years. So you have institutional investors go to Japan, borrow essentially for free, and then use that to pile into risk assets such as crypto, such as the Magnificent Seven, the big momentum stocks, um, that have really carried this particular bull market. So Japan unexpectedly raised rates a couple weeks ago. So that made the carry trade unprofitable because basically the yen strengthened against the dollar. So now you've introduced this foreign currency exposure due to that relative rate differential. Um, and so, people basically had to get out of these positions, reduce their leverage. There was like a deleveraging crunch in the hedge fund world. Um, and look, it's retraced mostly. Does that mean it's over? Probably not. Right. Like, for example, like we wrote a lot about when there was a repo blow up where the overnight bank to bank repo market spiked like 10% in one day in it was something like October 2019, right? Screwed up a lot of the plumbing of the market, and then 6 months later, COVID came and that catalyzed a big crash. But the repo market had kind of set that up structurally, already. So, one of the things that you're hearing everybody talk about right now in markets is everyone wants a rate cut. They're like, inflation is slowing, you know, don't mind the fact that, it's one thing for when you talk about inflation slowing, you're talking about the rate of expansion. So things are still getting more expensive. They're just getting more expensive at a slower rate. But things have been getting massively more expensive ever since COVID.
Hmm.
So you've had 4 years of things, accelerating at a steep angle.
Yeah.
Now they're still going, but maybe it's a little less steep of an angle, right? Um, so higher prices are still very much hurting the American consumer. You have massive amounts of debt, but so everyone wants a rate cut, right? Because most portfolio managers who are alive today haven't really traded, or at least for most of their career, they've traded at near 0% interest rates, right? Since 2008, we've basically had 0% interest rates, except for the last 2 years. Um, so people haven't really adapted too well to that. But here's the thing. Okay, if you're worried about this carry trade, which you saw what happened to the market, 6 trillion or whatever in one day, because the spread between the dollar and the yen changed by a quarter of a point. Well, guess what? If you cut US interest rates, that's the same thing in terms of this very key, carry spread as what happened from Japan raising rates. So a rate cut, as much as everybody is begging for it, they're almost like drug addicts on these 0% interest rates. Um, it could cause the same problem again.
I think I don't know if I've had you on or if it's it all blurs together. Dave Collin was on here the other day and he was talking about
I think we did a joint podcast
yeah,
together with you.
I think
I
so, yeah.
love Dave.
Yeah, no, Dave's fucking amazing.
Well,
I've done
Dave and I have been Twitter friends since 2011 and I'm up global. But
okay,
then,
yeah,
like, the
that's
first time we actually ever directly interacted was on your show.
yeah, okay. I'm sure 1,551 episodes, they start to blur. But he was talking about the other day on here about and the said some economists explained it well. He was like, the more, I guess, like complex a system gets and the more borrowing and inflation there is over decades and centuries, he's like, it starts to get the equivalent of building like a Jenga tower really tall. It gets to a point where
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't even really, it's not that the additional layer on level 50 or 100 of the Jenga tower is any worse than the earlier layers. It's just that it's so tall that early on in a Jenga tower, when it's 6 inches tall, you could probably hit it with your elbow and it's fine. Once it gets to 10 feet, though, a butterfly lands on it and it goes sideways. And he was like, look, and he's like, what happened to Japan wasn't like necessarily cataclysmic, but it had a cataclysmic event, or it created almost a cataclysmic ripple. Is it more of something? It's or for more history minded people like Gavril Princip, like look back and they say he's the most influential man of the 20th century. He shot Franz Ferdinand. It set off World War One. World War One set the stage for World War Two. World War Two set the stage for the Cold War. And it's like he shot Gavril Princip, and 60 years later we landed on the moon. Sure, that is historically accurate, but but the the situation in like the Balkans in like the 1919s, everyone remembers the term as it was the powder keg. If he didn't do it, someone else was going to. It's not that he was necessarily some visionary. He was a dude that went and shot another dude. Is is there any similarities between that and this? Was this like a fundamental structural change, or was it like yeah, I mean, was it the butterfly landing on the Jenga tower that's 10 times taller than it should be?
Yeah. Well, one thing about markets is as they've gotten more complex, as they've gotten more levered, and as they've gotten faster, things tend to just reprice now.
Hmm.
Like if you look back at COVID in 2020, we basically had a 1 month massive crash and then a complete V bottom, right? And I think 2020 we actually wound up ending higher in the stock market, like with COVID, right? So there's so much liquidity in the system, right? Like 40% of all dollars ever created have been
Yeah.
created in the last like 4 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so and you got all this high frequency trading, all the algorithmic trading. Um, things move really quickly, but yeah, I mean, when you see such momentum gain, like we have, new multi-trillion dollar companies like every week when that, wasn't a thing 2 years ago,
Yeah.
right? Um, that liquidity tends to, concentrate in those momentum names. It's like the Nifty 50 in the 70s, the dot com, in the 90s, right? And it just there's always big pullbacks. Like nothing can go, straight up forever. Personally, I don't think we're done. Like we wrote, our hedge fund newsletter back in June that, we think there's about a 60% chance of a major, correction in equities this year, 30% or so, right? And in like you said with the butterfly, it's hard to know when the butterfly is going to flap its wings and trigger that. Um, but usually a butterfly does come along and it does something, right? But you got massive consumer debt, you have massive interest expense on the U.S. debt, right? And that's something that people don't talk enough about. I think is just the cost. You have all this inflation, right? But at the same time, you have all this liquidity in the system and all the borrowing. to finance it, right? I mean, we've had 15 years of quantitative easing, right? You had like 13 years of 0%, interest rates. So, now just interest payments on the US debt exceed
The DoD now.
defense spending. Yeah, right. So like that's just not sustainable, right? So then there's all this pressure on the US to cut rates because that'll, cut those interest payments on the US debt, but then it's also going to mess with the carry trade, right? So because that's going to go weaken the dollar again, against the yen. So markets are complicated, and little changes can have massive effects.
In terms of just like, I guess, kind of the bigger, which is what you and I have talked about before. Some people I have to kind of like ease into like bigger picture conspiracy stuff, but you and I have talked about this before, where it's just like, well, is this just all, is this just a satanic Marxist movement taking over the world? Do you think that because it is like it is no longer the cracks are so large and meaningful in terms of the interest payments on the debt, it's no longer like a political buzzword or the debt counter clock in Times Square. It is now like you're in Titanic and like your feet are getting wet. Do you
Well,
think that?
listen,
No, no, keep
so
going.
the Satanists, right? Like the people of the World Economic Forum,
Yeah,
they're brilliant in a sense is that they
they're
have all
very
these evil
smart.
plans, but they just say them all out loud, right? And it's
Yeah,
like you can't really be a conspiracy theorist
yeah,
if you're just like pointing out what they say publicly, because it's
yeah,
usually a conspiracy. They're trying to hide it. So,
yeah,
their brilliance is they say it all,
yeah.
and then,
No, yeah,
it can't be a secret. But, their plan, they want a quote, great reset of the global financial system in 2030. And it's not that far away, right? It's
yeah,
5.5 years.
yeah.
Okay. And, the debt bubbles we have are absolutely insane, right? And then so there's a book out there and a documentary called The Great Taking, which is kind of the corollary of the Great Reset. And basically, its hypothesis is, the way that they're going to achieve, another publicly and said Klaus Schwab, WEF quote, right, that you'll own nothing and be happy, right? Is basically the theory of the Great Taking is when they do eventually crash um, the debt based financial system, because there's so much debt now you can't really conceivably pay it off in any of our lifetimes,
Hmm.
right? But basically, if the banks fail, right, and they say everything in U.S. banks are wiped out, maybe they'll say everything other than a FDIC insured amount is wiped out. Well, guess what? Almost everybody owns their houses on some kind of mortgage, right? So, the stock market crashes, if banks are wiped out, how do you pay a mortgage? Right. So, like the theory from the Great Taking goes is that all this happens, and they say, well, listen, since the whole financial system crashed, since 99% of people, had their money in banks, lost all this money, you can't pay your mortgage anymore. What we'll do is print a central bank digital currency, give you stimulus like we did, during the COVID lockdowns, and that CBDC will let you buy food and stay alive or whatever. You're completely dependent on the government, like communist style now. And it's like maybe they'll let you stay in your homes, but now they own them,
Mm.
right? Because you couldn't make those mortgage payments. Like that's the gist of the theory. And that, basically everything in the US economy, stocks, bonds, even if you own them, right, they're rehypothecated, right? So your brokers are, relending out stocks that you own, right? Like this is what we saw at 2008, and then the bailout stopped it. But if you are nefarious and you do believe the WEF, and look, you've got major bank CEOs in the WEF, right? It's not just that some random lunatic commie sympathizers. Like these are people with actual real power. If you believe that that's what they want to do, this is kind of a mechanism they would you know they do it. You have some major stressor financial system, you wipe out stock markets, banks, and then seize any asset that's owned on even the slightest bit of credit.
Is it a is it a coincidence or is it a noteworthy puzzle piece about how every social security number was leaked yesterday or the day before?
It's a good question. I mean, it's that basically calls for a great reset of the whole Social Security. I
Y-
mean, first of all, Social Security number is one of the most absurd things on earth. From if you look at it from a technological security standpoint, right? Like, there's no two-factor authentication. Like, it's developed just on secrecy, but you got to put it in on any
And
credit
everything.
application or background check or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's nothing secret about it. So
No.
it's kind of an absurd system to begin with. But yeah, I mean, I would imagine at the very least, we're going to see a slew of new, identity theft and fraud.
And we've talked about this before, and I kind of want your thoughts on it. Is, as more people move to something like Bitcoin or other cryptos, and as a I guess a parallel to owning physical gold and silver, I think you've said it before on here, is like, is that just a sly way of getting people on board with digital currencies, or even worse, is it not just like a sly psychological thing? Are these already owned by intelligence? Like, why wouldn't the CIA create Bitcoin? Why wouldn't, I mean, even just from like a military standpoint, why wouldn't the NSA create it? How else do you set up a honeypot to, nations are always building the fastest supercomputers, but it's the shit they publicly advertise. They're not showing what military, computer they have. A way that you would get people to, I guess, show their hand, if you will, would be to create a digital gold and then see who goes and reaches for it. And really, you'd have to probably have like a quantum computer to crack it. How else would you honeypot? See what China really has, see what India really has. Is you put something out there that's a digital gold and see who reaches for the cookie jar. So I think it's more likely than not that something like Bitcoin is the NSA or is CIA, and you create an escape from the corrupt fiat system, but really is like we're just running from one death camp to another one. Come on, get out of Auschwitz, get out of Auschwitz. Come into Dachau. We're all like, thank God. I got to put all my money in Dachau coin. Like, you just jump into the next thing. Is there think there's any legitimacy to that or
Well, I mean, I definitely think the government probably 80% likelihood that they created Bitcoin, right? Like, maybe DARPA instead of
yeah.
CIA.
Yeah,
But
sure. Yeah.
look, if you look at the design thesis for Bitcoin, right, it's something that's like decentralized, private, supply constrained. Um, and then you look at like a central bank digital currency, it's the exact opposite, right? It's like captive to the government, could track, every transaction. Um, it's almost like if it was the government created, they're probably creating it to get people conditioned to using digital currencies, get them excited about it, right? Um, get everybody using it, build the user interfaces, make it, consumer friendly, and then bait and switch people, right? So say a collapse, right? Back in 1933, the government actually confiscated gold,
Hmm.
right? Well, now that you got Bitcoin ETFs, you got Ethereum ETFs. Well, if the government, wanted to, if the Great Reset happens and people are like, well, I got my Bitcoin, I got my ETH, that's going to save me. I'm like, well, guess what? As of tomorrow, BTC and ETH are illegal. Well, all your biggest owners of them now are these ETFs, which are basically quasi-governmental entities anyway at this point, right? Be pretty trivial for the government to seize all the coins out of there, right? And then the next step they make, Coinbase, any major exchange, they make that illegal. So unless you have something like, that's self-custody that you could also seek it from the government, then they take the crypto out and, you could only transact in the, central bank digital currency where they see every single transaction. And if you buy a gun, they're like, oh, you violated your social credit score, you're zeroed out, right? Oh, you criticize, communist Kamala, we're going to zero out your Fed coin, right? So I mean, like that's the potential very dystopian future if um, the promise of decentralization becomes a centralized, captive, government controlled CBDC.
Hmm. I guess I don't, and another option in the flow chart is, do you think we're just going to instigate World War III to just clear the debt or knock it off or whatever? Because it's debt payments are, like I said, they're now too meaningful to ignore. It's not just a buzzword or some shitty boomer meme or this many trillion when I was a kid. Like, no, it's like it's here, and it just exceeded the DoD's annual budget. Are we
Yeah,
just
I
gonna
mean,
go for
listen, this year there's been a lot of potential World War III sparks, right? I mean, to me, it's probably more motivated to try to, have some BS for canceling the election or forcing, mail-in ballots, right? But one of the problems, um, with having general elections is that no one cares about the future. They just care about winning the next election, right? So it's one of the reasons that debt goes so high because you can buy votes with debt. Like Biden defying the Supreme Court and it's like, oh, I'm going to cancel student loan debt, right? Or all this government stimulus, right? That's completely, devalued the dollar's, purchasing power, right? People, politicians will do whatever they can to stay in power, right? So if the politicians call on a show, I don't know if they're going to do World War III to bring about you know, like debt repayment, but the leftists who, they're trying to get authoritarian control over the entire world, one global government where you criticize them, you go to jail, right? You know, they at some point, might try to absolutely destroy the financial system.
what can then the average person realistically do to not save the world, but take care of themselves?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean it's a good question. I mean, like I have friends who are like moving to South America, right? Like their thesis is if shit really goes down in the northern hemisphere, the nukes will all be up here, Russia, China, the US, right? Like no one cares about, nuking South America or like Africa, right? Um, I have people who are, moving out of the UK, given what's happened there. Um, I mean, people are worried, right? I mean, the U.S. it's basically Florida and Texas are like the two, major Alamos, other than the pockets and Middle America, Wyoming, like Montana, stuff like that. Um, but a lot of people I know are very, very concerned, right? So people are trying to stash hard assets, ammo, food, um, trying to definancialize a little bit.
What does that mean?
Well, just get stuff out of just like electronic markets, right? Electronic banks, you know, self custody crypto rather than on exchange crypto or rather than on ETFs,
Yeah.
right? Or like actually like own gold bars instead of being in, GLD, which is financialized gold.
Hmm. So for people that don't have enough money to like move to South America, what would you? This isn't financial
No,
advice.
yeah, yeah, yeah. None of this is financial advice.
Yeah, no.
Um, but no, I mean the biggest thing, honestly, is beat the drum that we need election integrity. Okay, like especially if you're in like Arizona, Minnesota, any of these swing states, because really this election, I mean, no hyperbole. Everyone says every election is the most important. I think if the Dems win, Western civilization ceases to exist how we know it, right? And it's not Kamala calling the shots. I mean, she's a cackling communist, right? But her and Biden all taking orders from the same place, and they want one global government, and want to eliminate all carbon, including overpopulation, right? Us,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to rule over the ashes, right? So really, if you look at the last election, you have very dubious voting practices in the big cities within the swing states. So Atlanta, Philadelphia, Detroit, Phoenix, right? So, look, go volunteer, be a poll monitor, okay? Call your governor and get all your friends to call the governor and be like, copy Florida's, voter integrity law, right? You look at like DeSantis, where, before you have voter integrity laws, he beat Gillum, who was what looks like a crackhead having affairs with like prostitutes 3 blocks from where I live in Miami. Um, right. And he was under like federal investigation for corruption, right? DeSantis beat Gillum by like 0.2% of the vote, right? He just won re-election by over 1 million votes because he put in, voter ID, ban ballot harvesting, right? And the whole country needs that, right? And there's still enough time to enact that. Most states that don't have it, but you gotta beat the drum and make your voices heard, and just complaining about it on a podcast and social media, doesn't do anything, right? You gotta get in people's faces, and really annoy them directly, into passing that change that they don't want to, right? I mean, like, look at the Save Act,
Hmm.
right? That made um, try to put protections in against illegals, voting. Some people theorize you got up to like 8 million illegals on voter rolls where they don't even need to show up, just their name is registered and someone could fill out a ballot in their name. You don't need voter ID, you don't need signature checks, anything like that. So, I think really the biggest risk in this election is in election integrity.
Did you listen to the Trump Musk interview at all?
Yeah, some. It was like 3 a.m. here, but
Yeah.
I did as much as I could. I thought it was great.
Um,
I'd love
yeah,
to see Kamala more though, right?
that would
Someone
be
put in
that would
some.
be great.
I mean, dude, trying to hear her like improv for 3.5 hours, 30 minutes, right? I mean, like she can't like form coherent sentences if she's not like reading off a teleprompter.
That was, yeah, I think Musk said that. He was like, it's so telling that like Biden can't have a conversation because he's brain dead. He's like, Kamala can't because it has to be script. That is such a tell-all that you can't have a conversation. But I mean, he spoke, Musk kind of reiterated extensively towards the end, really to drive home the point of like what inflation is and how it really does completely fuck the common man, and that we are at like I think he said a civilizational crossroads right now. It's
We are.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to like doom porn people, but I also don't know anything about markets or finances, so this is all like alien to me. But I don't know and I'm tasking you with the impossible. Is like, what is the silver lining? What is the optimism in this? How can people pivot?
Well, listen, I mean, there's evil in the world clearly, but good seems to always win somehow, right? But the biggest thing is like, good people can't just sit idly by, hope for the best. Like you gotta get out there. And right now, we could do it fighting, but without like in a war like context, right? Like if we actually do get into legitimate communism, you vote your way in, but you gotta shoot your way out.
Hmm.
Right. So, people ask me all the time, like, you run these businesses and stuff, like, why do you spend all this time, on advocacy? Right. And it's like, listen, I'm not elected every 4 years. I'm long term invested in these. And, I think Elon gets this too, that, if you actually care about your fiduciary duty as a CEO, you got to have the long term survivability of capitalism. Because if we go into communism, like, none of my businesses are going to exist.
Hmm.
Right. So, I try to get my voice out there. I think one thing I've been talking about lately too is just how the left is great at getting people who don't really think critically on their side, right? And that's by pandering to their empathy, right?
Hmm.
Like we saw this a lot in COVID. Okay, it's like and I will say the UK was like the one jurisdiction that was actually honest to people, and they told people in their 20s, it's like, listen, you're actually at more risk from getting a jab than you are from COVID itself, but get the jab for grandma,
Yeah.
right? It's like, for the Democrats now, it's that same kind of thought process. It's like you know, vote for Kamala because you got to maintain a woman's right to choose, or, vote, vote Kamala to stop fascist Trump, right? Well, let me tell you, we had 4 years of Trump. What did Trump do that was fascist? Like not start any new wars, like destroy ISIS, have a great economy with low inflation. It's like, look, mean tweets on Twitter. I wish he'd cut that down a little bit. I mean, they're funny,
Yeah.
but when you have weak-minded people who are easily persuaded, when you make them feel like they're virtuous by supporting the left, right? Like love is love, right? Um, they don't get the cognitive dissonance that by saying, like, sure, most people would agree with the thing, like love's a good thing. If you actually love someone, great,
Sure.
it doesn't matter who it is,
Go
right? If
for
it's
it.
consenting adults, fine,
Go for
okay.
it.
But there's just such a slippery slope, right? And it's like the left, they pretend to care about women's rights, but then look what we just saw in the Olympics, where you've
Just
got, like,
woman beat the
men
shit out
breaking.
of. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you want to beat the shit out of a woman and get a medal for it and crush her, lifelong dream, and what she like promised her dead father she was going to do. I mean, it's absolutely
Horrific.
horrific what gets done, in the name of love is love, right? Like, look how many kids have been mutilated,
Yeah.
right, over gender affirming care, where you tell kids, that you got to, you act a little feminine one day, you got to chop, your
Chop your
genitals off.
tits
I
off,
mean,
chop your dick off. Yeah, it's no,
it's
it
horrific, but they use that same kind of strategy to get the votes out. Like
yeah.
the Karens of the world, who are bored and whatever, they get them, fired up. It's like, you know, you got to go vote, or else the fascists are gonna win. But guess what? In psychology, there's a concept called projection. Okay, which is
Yeah.
when you're a fascist, you call everybody else a
Yeah.
fascist,
They're gonna
right?
fucking yeah.
That's not Trump. Like, look, you would say Trump could be a bully, Trump could be a name caller, maybe he's not presidential at time, but policy wise, is he a fascist? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Okay. Whoever's controlling Biden, who's been controlling the shots, for the last 4 years with vax mandates, mask mandates, hyper, or not quite hyperinflation, but massive amounts of inflation, you know, gaslighting, right? You go back to, like, let's go Brandon.com coin. How did that start? Because everyone's chanting fuck Joe Biden, but then the media is like, oh, they're all saying let's go Brandon. Isn't that great? So the leftists, and they're at this point, the media has become basically a propaganda
Mm.
arm, right? And they gaslight everybody, but that's what the left is about, right? And it's really sad how many people believe them. Now, I think they also gaslight with fake polls that are oversampled. The Democrats, if as a markets guy, I look at what's going on at, like, Poly Market, and to me that seems similar to what's going on in Act Blue, where apparently they're laundering donations through random people's names who are on Democratic donor rolls. You've had all sorts of people come out and be like, supposedly hundreds of Democratic donations made through, like, unemployed Democrat voters, for tens of thousands of dollars. Super sus. I would not be shocked if someone like George Soros, who's thrown tons of money winning these DA races to destroy America, from within by being, soft on crime, the lawfare against Trump, yada yada yada. I wouldn't be surprised if him or of his ilk are out there just bidding up Kamala on Polymarket, right? So that they're really good at manipulating the narrative and think that they're winning. I still think the vast majority of Americans are smarter than that, and they get what this election is really about. But by doing the gaslighting, they create plausible deniability. So if there are shenanigans with the election, with these illegals on the rolls, or all these, like, ballots like harvested, and we have 150,000 Biden votes come in at 2 a.m. with
Mm.
no down ballot support. Little sus last
Mm.
time, right? So they know too. Trump has seen a lot at this point, right? He knows where, like, the bodies are buried. He knows he can get trust, right? Like, if they let him back in, they're at a lot of risk, right? So they're going to throw every. I mean, look, they try to kill him,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that wasn't just some random, 20-year-old acting alone. I mean, like we've seen all these videos come out, and everyone stopped talking about this. This is what, like a month ago? Like the president literally got shot on the head. Okay, where the Secret Service left the best vantage point unattended. They left him on stage, when cops were aware of this, people were complaining or whatever. So I mean, they will stop at nothing
Yeah.
to win this election.
The only, and I know I gotta let you go in a minute, but I was gonna say, yeah, it's you know, the it means it's a lot like an illness. Obviously, if it kills you, that's no good. But the closer you get to death without dying, the stronger your immune response is. The closer you get to, so the only, I guess, silver lining is like looking at what they've done to Trump, from like the mugshot last year to the 34 felonies to literally shooting him in the head. If they don't
Mm-hmm.
succeed, I mean, I would imagine that the lashback is going to be so powerful. Where you have people being like, "Yeah, man, I'm for love is love and trans right." Like they try to shoot him in his head in front of his family. Like who knows? But maybe I'm projecting logic and rationality on
Mm-hmm.
that a group,
Always dangerous.
yeah, a group of people who really is it's kind of emotionally based and that's such a good like microcosm of like love is love, women's rights, and you follow it to the nth degree, and it's a woman getting the shit beaten out of her in front of the planet. And then the guy, it's not arrested for domestic abuse, he's given a medal. Like that is
Well, they also have the trans Last Supper and the
oh, totally.
the horsemen of the apocalypse on the
Yeah,
the pale horse. I mean,
it's so fucking in your face, you know. But I know I gotta let you run. Appreciate your time as always. Guys, please go in the description. Please go follow him on Instagram and Twitter and all that good stuff. And yeah, man, safe travels.
thank you. Good to talk to you as always, bud.
You too, man. Thank you so much for your time, Jim. Guys, thank you for
Anytime.
watching. Take care, everybody.